ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the BBC's prestigious radio theatre. To say it's a delight to have you here tonight is an absolute understatement. We are truly honoured, and this is bound to be an absolutely memorable evening. My name is Nelson Abbey, and I'm the executive producer of tonight's great Black History Month debate. Obama, job well done. Now, to say this is a critical juncture in Black history is an understatement and a half, and I promise to stop repeating that word. What we're currently living through is a period in Black and global history that will be discussed and picked apart for hundreds, literally hundreds of years to come. If you told any of what we today consider to be the greats, the heroes of Black history, Harriet Tubman, Marcus Garvey, Kwame Nkrumah, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Biggie Smalls, somebody must have inserted this, that we would today have a Black president leaving office after 2 terms. 2 terms with pretty much no scandal. 2 terms with no assassination attempt. 2 terms with most of his hair turned grey, but still looking quite good. They would not believe it. They wouldn't. In fact, if you said the same thing to this room in 2006, I strongly doubt that most of us would believe it too. So we, the BBC's Black and Asian Forum, could not think of a more befitting subject to address as part of our 2016 Black History Month celebrations than this monumental occasion. Ladies and gentlemen, as I stated earlier on, we have a very special evening set up for you. An evening that I'm sure will be informing, educating, entertaining, and distinctive. That's what we call meeting the license fee objective or so. Yeah. We have with us this evening one of Britain's foremost poets and writers to open the proceeding for us with a poem. This man needs zero introduction whatsoever. As a writer, he has won more major awards than we have time to list. He has honorary doctorates from Exeter, Essex, SOAS, Bedfordshire. He's an Oxford Fellow. He's won the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, the Guardian Fiction Prize, the Booker Prize, and the Bad Sex and Fiction Award. Don't know why. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the great Ben Okri.
Sometimes the world is not changed till the right person appears who can change it. But the right person is also, in a way, the right time. For the time and the person have to work together, the secret alchemy. But to change the world is more than changing its laws. Sometimes it is just being a new possibility, a portal through which new fire can enter this world of foolishness and error. They change the world best who change the way people think. For it is our thoughts that make our world. Some think it's our deeds, but deeds are the children of thought. The thought changers are the game changers, are the life changers. We think that achievements are symbols, but symbols are not symbols. Obama is not a mere symbol. Sometimes even a symbol is a sign that we are not dreaming potently enough. A sign that the world is the home of possibility. A sign that our chains are unreal. That we are freer than we know, that we are more powerful than we dare to think. If he is a symbol at all, then he is a symbol of our possible liberation. A symbol also that power in this world cannot do everything. Even Moses could not set his people free. They too had to wander in the wilderness. They too turned against their leaders and their God and had to overcome much in their makeup and their history to arrive at the vision their prophets had long before. Being a Black president is not a magic wand that will make all Black problems disappear. Leaders cannot undo the evils that structural evils make natural in the life of a people. Not just leadership, but structures must change. Structures of thought, structures of dreams, structures of injustice, structures that keep a people imprisoned to the stones and the dust and the ash and the dirt and the dry earth and the dead roads. Always we look to our leaders to change what we ourselves must change with the force of our voices and the force of our souls and the strength of our dreams and the clarity of our visions and the strong work of our hands. Too often we get fixated on symbols. We think fame ought to promote our cause, that presidents ought to change our destinies, that more black faces on television would somehow make life easier and more just for our people. But symbols ought to only be a sign to us that the power is in our hands. Mandela ought to be a sign to us that we cannot be kept down, that we are self-liberating. And Obama ought to be a sign to us that there is no destiny in color. There is only destiny in our will and our dreams, and the storm our no's can unleash, and the wonder our yeses can create. But we have to do the work ourselves to change the structures so that we can be free. Freedom is not a color. Freedom is a thought. It is an attitude, a power of spirit, a constant self-definition. And so what Obama did and did not do is neither here nor there in the great measure of things. History knows what he did against the odds. History knows what he could not do. Not that his hands were tied, but that those who resent the liberation of one who ought not to be liberated blocked those doors and those roads and whipped up the sleeping and not so sleeping demons of race hate, twin deity of America. And they turned his yes into a no just so they could say they told us so. Told us that color makes ineffectuality, that color makes destiny. They wanted him to fail so they could prove their case. Can't you see it? But that's what heroes do. They come through in spite of all that blockage and sabotage, all those obstacles thrown in the path of the self-liberated. That way, the symbol would be tainted and would fail to be a beacon and a sign that it is possible to be black and great. Muhammad Ali overcame that tough fate. Mandela transfigured white hate. Obama twice became head of state. I don't trust mirrors. Many of them lie. But we need dreams to show us what we can be and images to show us where we are. Where we are is too nebulous to be defined by class or color or gender or height. We are beyond definition. The state can't measure our true estate. Not the school we attended, nor our parents' name, nor the university we studied at, nor the forms of apprenticeship that life offered can define or measure our measureless possibility. No one can define us except us. From the beginning of time, no such measure was ever made to be part of the immortal shape of things. That's all I want to say. No God, no race, no power, no state, no secret agreement of prejudice can set a seal on what we are or what we can be. For we are made with the force that shapes the stars and galaxies. That's all I want to say. Obama says that too in his own way. So the healthcare is a Republican scare. Taking on the gun lobby isn't an easy hobby. And it seems to be a black male is a high chance of being in jail. Or, in fact, just being black means the police will shoot you in the front or in the back. And while American justice gets fatter, it becomes necessary to say that black lives matter. Hey, I know that all lives count, It's the number of the black dead that mount. He started well in the Middle East till it became a Syrian death feast. He gave black prisoners the largest amnesty since 3 strikes and you're out days of Clinton's dynasty. He tried hard to unravel the gun culture, but to Americans, the gun seemed second nature. What can you do with the Lord's commandment when you've got the Fourth Amendment? Equality runs through American life like a family dysfunctional with strife. This is a country where nothing is free that calls itself the land of opportunity. Against all this, with all the will and feist, what can one man do, even if it's Jesus Christ? He brought to power elegance and grace. He stood within and above race. He couldn't be just a black president, but also for all who lived in the Republic and were resident. To the White House, he brought black nobility and gave ultimate form to upward mobility. He did many things, many good things for climate change and much else beyond this poem's range. He did something special for the American tone, and we'll miss him more when he's gone. Not in our lifetime again will we see the charms of his presidency. Thank you very much.
That was amazing. Thank you very, very much, Ben. You've got to be careful with these Nigerians, man. He was given 5 minutes, but he took 10. And these Nigerians, they're taking over everything. You've got to be really careful. Our moderator tonight is a highly decorated journalist who knows a thing or two about America. A former Washington and Los Angeles correspondent for the BBC. He's covered every single presidential race since 1996. Many of you weren't born when that happened. Dole, Clinton, Gore, Bush, Kerry, Bush, Obama, McCain, Obama, Romney, and he will soon be on the plane to do Washington, on the plane to Washington for Clinton and Trump. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a man I describe as the Jay-Z of journalism, the great Clive Myrie.
The Jay-Z of journalism. Don't worry, I will not be singing tonight. Thank you very much indeed, Nelson. Good evening and a warm welcome to you all for what I hope will be an illuminating reflection on the legacy of America's first black president. Now, I know where I was on the evening of November the 4th, 2008. I was in the Great Hall at Morehouse College in Atlanta, whose alumni include Martin Luther King, Samuel L. Jackson, and of course, Spike Lee. And I was broadcasting live as the announcement was made that Barack Obama had completed the most difficult job interview on the planet and sealed the deal. Around me, grown men and many women were in tears. My colleague, a good friend of mine at ABC News in America, was broadcasting live, and tears were streaming down his face. Now, I'm not American, but I felt the power and symbolism of that moment. Who couldn't? Because African Americans on that day, at that moment, had completed a long, tortuous journey from the plantation to the presidency, from servitude to superiority. So, 80 years later, as we near the end of his time in the White House, the hope so very real in the hearts of many that 2008 was a new beginning, was it realized? Did Barack Hussein Obama justify the faith placed in him by black Americans? Here's a brief reminder of the last 8 years.
Yes, we can! Yes, we can! Yes, we can!
This is an historic moment. The United States of America has elected its first black president.
In churches, in bars, on the streets, Americans have been celebrating this great landmark in the long struggle for civil rights. In Chicago, the veteran black leader Jesse Jackson broke down in tears.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you.
That the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda.
These letters, I think, do more to keep me in touch with what's happening around the country than just about anything else.
Since I've been president, this is the 4th time we have come together to comfort a grieving community torn part by mass shooting.
So here's a clip showing the subtle difference between Gordon Brown and Barack Obama. Here they are arriving at number 10, and look at this lucky policeman gets to shake hands with the President of the United States. Oh, and here comes the Prime Minister of the... No.
When people say Black Lives Matter, that doesn't mean blue lives don't matter. It just means all lives matter. But right now, the big concern is the fact that the data shows black folks are more vulnerable to these kinds of incidents. A picture's worth 1,000 words, and what we're seeing here, I think, gives you some sense of what the people of Moore and the people of Oklahoma have been dealing with. My main message is to the parents of Trayvon Martin. You know, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. Professor Gates is already in his house. The police officer comes in. I'm sure there's some exchange of words, but Professor Gates then shows his ID to show that this is his house. And at that point, he gets arrested for disorderly conduct. What I think we know separate and apart from this incident is that there is a long history in this country of African Americans and Latinos being stopped by law enforcement disproportionately. It has been an honor and a privilege to work side by side with you to strengthen our democracy. And with that, I just have two more words to say. Obama out.
I'm very, very pleased to say we have 4 panels of eminent commentators to debate the Obama legacy, including, I hope, technology willing, God willing, contributions live from the United States. 2 panels will argue the president has delivered for African Americans, and 2 panels will argue he hasn't. You, the audience, will be able to contribute as well. We really want your input. So just raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you whenever you feel the need. You're hearing a load of rubbish up here. Get your hand up there and say that's a load of old rubbish. Get involved. We really want your participation as well. Then at the very end, we'll have your public vote as you decide, based on what you've heard, if the Obama presidency did or did not deliver for black people. So, to our first set of panelists to discuss the Obama social and cultural legacy, including crime and punishment and Obama's image in black society. Arguing that he did deliver will be Afua Hirsch, a former barrister, human rights worker, and now social affairs editor for Sky News. Joseph Harker, deputy editor and a columnist for the Guardian newspaper's opinion section. And Eko Ishan, a writer, journalist and broadcaster and former artistic director of the Institute of Contemporary Arts in London. Ladies and gentlemen, the first panel. And making the case that President Obama didn't deliver on social and cultural grounds for African Americans are Dr. Mark Ledwidge, Senior Lecturer in American Politics at Canterbury Christ Church University, Kevin Cobham, a criminal defense lawyer and community activist, and via webcam from New Jersey, Dr. Eddie Glaude, Chair of the Center for African American Studies at Princeton University. The panel. What I'd like to do is ask both sides to give a 2-minute opening statement setting out their case. So, for the defense, Afua Hirsch.
In The Audacity of Hope, Obama said, "I serve as a blank screen onto which people of all political backgrounds project their visions." And that's, I think, why, in a way, and I can't disagree with Ben Okri, how can I? He's a legend. That's why, in a way, what Ben said is true. What Obama did or didn't do, to some extent, doesn't matter. But on the other hand, it does matter. And as somebody who's projected my hopes and my vision onto it, I see a president who hasn't just delivered for African Americans. When Obama came into office, unemployment was more than 7% and rising. He is leaving it 4% and falling. What Obama has done for immigrants, for the children of people without papers to protect them from being deported, what he has done speaking powerfully in need of gun control, something that so many presidents have failed to do in appointing judges from minority backgrounds at so many courts, not least the Supreme Court, where he appointed the first Latina judge. You can't deny that Obama has left a tangible legacy in his policies and accomplishments that will long survive his presidency. There's one area that I want to focus on because I think it is so important. In fact, I would go so far as to say I think it is one of the gravest injustices in the Western world, and that is the mass incarceration of Americans, especially African Americans. It's what one academic, I'm sure many of you know, Michelle Alexander, has called the new Jim Crow. And for those of you who've seen the brilliant documentary, The 13th, you'll be familiar with the statistic that America has 5% of the world's population and almost 25% of the world's prisoners. It's an absolutely staggering statistic. And the charge has been leveled at Obama that this is one of the areas in which he has failed Americans, especially African Americans. We need to be real here. Only 10% of the 2.2 million Americans in jail are in federal jails. Most Americans are in state jails, and they're in state jails in a country which has been characterized by unequal justice and institutionalized racism from its very inception. This is not something that one president can change in 2 terms. But he has clearly and unambiguously set out the need to shrink the prison population. He has backed progressive suggestions, including one which I personally think is powerful and true, that raising the minimum wage would do more to reduce crime in America than mass incarceration ever could. There are disappointments, of course there are. Guantanamo Bay, the number of killings at the hands of law enforcement that has forced African Americans to rise up in the Black Lives Matter movement. But I think that we need to be realistic about what a president, the executive of this country, can achieve. He is the executive in a federal democracy. It's not a dictatorship, and he's not a dictator, and nor is he the Messiah. He's been stifled by a Congress and a House of Representatives that has gone to extraordinary lengths to frustrate him at every available opportunity. The fact that he's been able to push through reforms like Obamacare, like immigration measures, in spite of this resistance, I think deserves true credit.
Are you going to wrap up now?
I'm going to wrap up
You're not
by...
from Nigeria, are you?
I'm not Nigerian. I'm not Nigerian. So I can run late at will. I'm going to wrap up just by saying something about the fact that I believe that American masculinity, and especially white masculinity, is in crisis. And to prove this, I only need to point to the fact that America has seen fit to nominate a presidential candidate who has bragged publicly about the size of his penis and the fact that he has violated women. And I think in the face of that, this sheds Obama in a new light, even to some of his harshest critics. Here is a man who has never once acted without dignity and integrity in public. And in doing so, I think he has redefined Black masculinity to the world as a powerful statesman who is compassionate, who is a husband and a father.
Right.
And that, to me, has exceeded my expectations.
Much for that. Okay, arguing against the president's legacy. Eddie Glaude in New Jersey. Eddie, over to you.
Let me just get to it. We do not want to deny the significance of Barack Obama's presidency. I think symbolically it has mattered that the United States, a country whose history is rooted in settler colonialism and white supremacy, that we've elected a Black president. That's historic. And we do not want to deny that President Obama's achievements around the edges of the neoliberal regime that has dominated this country and the world. We don't want to deny that that's significant. But he has done little, if anything, to change the fundamental frame that sustains racial equity in this country. So in our view, he has failed Black America. Now, what do we know at the dusk of the Obama presidency? Black unemployment is twice that of white unemployment. 27.2% of African Americans live below the poverty level. 40% of our children live under the poverty level. In my home state of Mississippi, over 50% of Black children are growing up in poverty. African Americans earn 75% of the median hourly earnings of non-Hispanic whites. The 2016 home ownership rate for Blacks is lower than the national homeownership rate during the Great Depression years of the 1930s. All the while, the police keep killing us. Let me call the roll. Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Jonathan Crawford, Eric Garner, Rakia Boyd, Tanisha Anderson, Ayanna Stanley Jones, Ezell Floyd, Akai Gurley, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, Walter Scott, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, Terrence Crutcher, and just the other day, Deborah Danner, a 66-year-old black woman with mental health issues, was killed by the New York police. And it has been extraordinarily difficult, I think, to get the president to move in the face of this crisis. He has repeatedly declared that he is the president of all America. That has not been his response to the LGBTQ community in the United States. It wasn't his response when he signed the Lilly Ledbetter bill. And ironically, it wasn't his response when he proposed his My Brother's Keepers initiative, a private-public partnership centered around mentoring, a Band-Aid, in my view, for a gunshot wound, right? I think it's ironic that it's acceptable to propose a targeted program for mentoring black boys and men, but unacceptable to propose a targeted program for black people around unemployment. And to my mind, singing Al Green at the Apollo or Amazing Grace at St. Emmanuel in Charleston isn't sufficient. A cultural performance of blackness only serves as a fog to obscure the material reality of black life in this country. People can smile about that performance, and they can celebrate the fact that we have a black family in the White House, or laud the president as a role model for young people. But the fact remains, and it is undeniable in its implication, that his presidency has occasioned a deepening of racial inequality in this country, not to mention he's the drone president. I can go on and on, but I won't do that. I don't have time.
Please don't.
Likable though the president may be, one might think of him as something akin to Herman Melville's Confidence Man, selling the snake oil of hope and change. He was supposed to be different. He isn't. He is a neoliberal to the core, and neoliberalism traffics in the cultural goods of multiculturalism while deepening material inequality. So we will demonstrate President Obama has failed to deliver for Black America in that he has failed to address the fundamentals that sustain enduring racial inequality. Indeed, the fact of his presidency has given that inequality new life.
Okay.
Thank you.
Eddie Glaude. Let's touch on crime and punishment, because we've heard that coming from both the opening addresses there. To his credit, in 2010, the Fair Sentencing Act was passed, reducing disparities in punishment for the possession of crack and powder cocaine. If you were done for crack, you went to jail for longer. A bias against black people, clearly. So things changed. But the new law wasn't applied retroactively. So thousands of mainly black men remained behind bars when they could have been given clemency by the president. How do you explain that behavior? Wasn't he more worried about white opinion than black justice?
Let's not forget the fact that the US is a white majority country, first of all. And Eddie has a great list of problems in the which African Americans face: unemployment, housing, poorer earnings. But does he think that Barack Obama is a magician, that he can come and wave his wand and solve all of these in 8 years? I mean, this is just ludicrous. He was elected by a majority white population. He wasn't elected to represent Black America. He was elected to represent all of America. And even that, he started out trying to meet with his Republican opponents, and he was just met with a complete brick wall. In a way, the most important moment in Obama's presidency was that video you saw earlier with the arrest of Henry Louis Gates, the black professor, on his own doorstep. Obama, that was after just a few months of Obama's presidency. He stepped in there and defended Henry Louis Gates against the police. He saw a black man being harassed. He knew exactly the kind of trope that was. He knew exactly the situation. And he got completely fleeced for it. He got completely condemned for it by the media, by white America. And in a way, that moment changed the perception of Obama from being a president for all America to being a president for Black America. After that, we saw the rise of the Tea Party movement. We saw the rise of that angry white redneck who hated Obama. Because let's not forget, he had an amazing honeymoon period where his approval ratings were absolutely soaring. That's the moment where he came to the defense of a black person, and the backlash was just vicious beyond belief.
All right, Joseph, if I could just come in there.
So there's only so much that he can actually
Sure.
do.
All right, okay. Dr. Mark Ledwidge, he ain't no magician. That's ludicrous to believe that, right? Why should he have behaved like a black president and not simply a president who just happens to be black? There's a distinction there, isn't there?
About what I think is a historical juncture in our history that requires very deep and clear analysis. Now, in regards to your question, I'm a political scientist, so African Americans voted for Barack Obama to the 95th percentile. So if we take race out of the equation, just for the sake of it, you as a politician are supposed to deliver for your core constituency. So if the constituency votes for you to the 95th percentile, you are supposed to deliver things to them directly. So two things here. Number one, the American political system is an institution, the presidency. So the discussion about it being ludicrous, I understand that because there are clearly structural constraints. However, within that, you have to look at the role of the president and the role of a politician. And as I've stated very clearly, he needed to directly address issues for African Americans in the way that he'd addressed issues for other groups.
But does that mean then that Hillary Clinton is completely and utterly screwed? Because she will get well over 90% of the African American vote, and she will get a vast majority of the female vote as well. Is she supposed to simply target those two constituencies?
No, this is the key thing that we have to remember. The issue here is one of, if you want to look at the Obama issue, the problem with Obama was that he needed to get in for a second term. Every politician wants to get in for a second term. So clearly, if he had delivered to African Americans, he would have risked the idea of getting in again. However, you have to have the political courage to do something for those people that voted for you. So for me, Barack Obama ran a race-neutral race. In 2008, he was race neutral. He took the Douglas Wilder approach. He didn't execute any policies that were directly geared to the interests of African Americans. And interestingly, both Clinton and Bush appointed more African Americans to the presidency than Obama did.
Okay, let's drill into that a little bit. Echo, if I could turn to you and the question of identity for Barack Obama and suggestions that, frankly, on the inside, he's not really black, right? The American philosopher Cornel West, we all know him. He's written that as a young brother who grows up in a white context, white mother and grandparents, elite schools and colleges, but having a brilliant African father, Obama's always had to fear being a white man in black skin. All he has known culturally is white. So the implication for West is that on a deeper fundamental level, Obama cannot identify with African Americans, and that's informed his policies towards them, potentially. There could be a ring of truth.
There's no ring of truth in that. I mean, Cornel West is a brilliant academic, but really it's a cheap shot, and it's actually a fairly ignorant point. Ignorant in this in the idea that race and our experience of race and our experience of difference is defined exclusively by phenotype, by skin color. Our experience of race, and I would say this for most people in this room, is determined by our lived experience. It's determined by the history that we grow up with. It's determined by the history of our forebears. It's determined by all of these factors that in many ways are beyond our control, but become the experience that we inherit as black people in this country. You can say, well, Obama's half white, therefore not truly black, but actually most of our racial experience is the things that are visited upon us by a white society around us. We're reminded every day that we're black in different ways. We're scorned, we're humiliated in all sorts of different ways. And our answer is to think about how we can comport ourselves, how we can define ourselves, how we can assert ourselves in ways that are significant for us, but also, hopefully, significant for other people. And that's where Obama delivers. You know, there are all sorts of criticisms one can make about him being a cautious politician and so on, but the thing I would absolutely hold fast to take Afra's point, is that here is a man who's determined, who's represented an idea of what blackness, what black maleness can be and has represented that to the world, not just Americans, not just African Americans, but to the world in, I would say, historic terms, in ways that no one has managed to do before because no one has been in that position before. And I think the intelligence, the eloquence, the grace, the humility, the openness, all of these things that he exemplifies, I think, have changed significantly how we understand some of the ways that black people can be understood on a big stage.
All right, Kevin Cobham, did Barack Obama have a problem with black people?
I think all black people, to a lesser or greater extent, if we follow the teachings of Frantz Fanon, have a problem with black people. Anti-blackness structures this world. Blackness was created on the holding forts, the slave holding forts on the west coast of Africa, and in the hold of the slave ships. That's what created blackness. And it's right, therefore, is it not, that there should be a problem with blackness. So yes, I would say yes, certainly.
But it's natural, you're saying?
It's not natural. It's not natural like rain, mountains, water. So no, it's not natural. It's socially produced. But to answer the question more specifically, we have to remember what Obama, what his theme was when he was elected. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Well, what are we saying yes to? Who is the we? And what is that which can be done? And as with many fatuous sayings which are said so that you can get votes, when you break it down, he was saying nothing about nothing apart from being the blackface of one of the two corporate entities which run for executive office in the United States. Full stop, or period, as our cousins in the United States might say. So from that point of view, he never was us. He never intended to be us. He never promised that he was going to be us. And we cannot identify today one significantly pro-black program which we can say as black people, Obama, you said you were going to do that for us and you never did it. And the election of Obama by 95% of African Americans reflects for me the hopelessness of this anti-black structure of capitalism within which we live. The absolute degrading hopelessness of it. 8 years after, let's call him what he is, he's the deporter-in-chief. He's an African who bombed Africa. He's an African who has said nothing about the structural violence of the United States, which means that African Americans are killed on the streets. And that violence is the normality by which the rest of the society knows themselves. He says nothing about that. And if he were to say something about that, and if his backers in Goldman Sachs and whoever back in 2006 thought he might say something about that, he would not have been the President of the United States. So we have to move the argument away from simply talking about voting or not voting. I have been identified on this panel as a Obama skeptic. I think that's unfair, because that suggests I've got something good to say about Obama.
All right, okay, on that note, zip it. Right, now, I want to hear from some of you guys in the audience. This has been fascinating. We're only going for like, what, 20 minutes or something? And it's been brilliant so far. I want some questions. I want some hands up. Come on now. Down the front. See.
What responsibility, therefore, does a community have on the basis that you cannot save a people who will not be able to save themselves? And any of you who's been to the States and met the family of Trayvon Martin and all the people that were killed, how many middle-class African Americans did you find on the streets protesting? Remember that. So I ask that question rhetorically. How can any man, African or not, save a people who themselves will not wish to be saved or are not ready to be saved?
I didn't quite understand that, but well, no, let me just say something then. The thing is, part of the problem is this. When Obama got in, I cried. But the reason why I cried was for my people, because I knew what it meant to black people and people of African descent all around the world. It meant something to me personally that I saw Obama get to that position. I don't have any problem with Obama. However, at the meeting that Travis Smiley put together in 2010, there was a discussion about the presidency of Obama. And one of the things that came out was our ignorance of power and how power works. One man cannot change the character of the United States. Now, I will. For institutional reasons, one man cannot change it. So first of all, black people have a Messiah complex. They're looking for the individual. Consequently, no. You see, the reason why you're laughing, you're not even letting me finish. You think, oh, he is. Well, he needs to let me finish. He needs to let me finish, because this is the point I'm directly addressing that question. That doesn't relieve him from the responsibility of doing his best to protect the interests of those people that voted for him. That is there solidly. Hold on, brother. Just let me finish. Let me finish my point.
The question has to be answered.
Yeah, that's fine. But can we do away with this idea that 90% of African Americans voted for him? That's his core constituency, and it's his duty to respond exclusively to them.
I never said that.
It doesn't work.
That's
that way.
not what I
said. He's a president of a whole country.
If you can't respect what somebody's going to say, if you can't maintain your discipline to listen to what someone's going to say, then you have a problem.
He's very disciplined. You have got 30 seconds to finish your point.
Thank you. That's fine. So, okay.
I want to bring Eddie in New Jersey. So
okay, no problem. So the point I'm trying to make is that the idea that one person can change everything is incorrect, and I agree with that, whoever says it. However, the problem for African Americans is that since the 1960s, the civil rights integrationists took on the idea that actually what we needed to do was to put forward politicians. Malcolm X had already said prior to his assassination that you will never have political power in America if you attempt to run it through the arena of politics by itself. Right. It's an impossibility.
Okay, I'm gonna bring in Eddie, because Eddie, very, very briefly, Eddie, please respond to what you've just been hearing.
So a couple of things. One is that we need to the questioner, it's very clear that there has been serious organizing across the country since Barack Obama has been elected. He has been moved on the question of criminal justice by Black Lives Matter, by organizers in the street. So it's not as if African Americans voted in this black man, viewed him as a messiah, that he would be the savior of black folk. I think that's just a caricature of the black electorate. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the idea that 95% of black people voted for Barack Obama with the expectation that he would deliver in some way policy to black people is not unreasonable. That's how we understand interest-based politics. So when you have women organizing around equal pay, you don't hear the same complaint. When you have LGBTQ community organizing around anti-discrimination law, right? The House Bill 1523 in Mississippi, you don't have people saying, I'm the president of all America. No one asked you whether or not you're the president of Black America, of all America. Because someone's asking him as a constituency that voted for him at 95% to speak to the condition. Now, what I laid out is clear. That it is clear by almost every relevant statistical measure, Barack Obama's presidency has not changed racial inequality in this country. The expectation is that he couldn't do it in 8 years, but he could at least address it. And so the fact that data suggests that he hasn't, and folks are still running around trying to defend him, I wonder if you defended George Bush in the same way by pointing to the limits of the American presidency. Of course you did.
All right,
you held him accountable.
All right, Eddie. Okay, Eddie, I'm just going to quick come in there. We really want to hear from the audience as well. Any questions in the audience? You, sir, at the front.
I have a lot of sympathy with Kevin's argument, especially as he touched on Africa. The two books that Obama wrote when he came in, I forget which one, I was full of hope that at long last we will have somebody in a position to make a change, and a significant change, as far as the direction of politics in Africa is concerned. In the book, he demonstrated a core understanding of the nonsense of the borders, the makeup of the states of Africa, and the roots of the problem. I was hoping, somebody was saying that one man can't change the character of America, but one president of America did change the shape of the world. That was the, let me land, it's an important point, is that this was the 32nd president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was the one, the Atlantic Charter, that forced the decolonization of the whole of Africa. Obama had an opportunity to make a change. I'm a Nigerian, turn the microphone on.
Just coming in now, sir. And it's a question, please, and keep it brief.
I will do, I'm going in.
Okay.
The gentleman in America points to statistics that haven't changed under the Obama administration.
Yeah.
Can you enlighten us on what those statistics are?
Okay, let me try and do that. Afua, I want to bring you in here. The US Justice Department figured for 2014, 37% of prison inmates are African American. Yet just 12 to 13% of the American population is black. If you're black, you stand a 1 in 3 chance of going to prison at some point in your life. You're a lawyer. That's embarrassing after 8 years of a black president, isn't it?
No, I'm actually grateful to our opponents on the other panel for really making this case for us, because they pointed out that we're dealing with deeply ingrained, historic, structural inequality that is intrinsically linked to the capitalist system on which America is founded. Now, I think they acknowledge, and I'm sure everyone here does, that a president in 8 years cannot radically alter the economic base, the ideological foundation, and the socioeconomic structure of America. We all know America's history and the fact that black poverty, black incarceration, injustice against African Americans is a direct legacy of slavery and sharecropping that came after it, and the Great Migration, and a series of unjust policies ever since. Now, I agree. I hoped, as many people did, that a president could do more to reverse that historic injustice. But I think we also need to be realistic. He's not Malcolm X. He's not Frantz Fanon. He is the executive of America, and America is founded on those principles. And I think maybe the lesson that we can all take from this is that if we are looking for somebody who can turn the fate of African Americans around, it is not going to come from the White House.
Okay, Mark. The fact of the matter is, it's not Barack. It's not a black president who's let down black people. It's a completely and utterly useless Congress. They have done this. Actually, Kevin, can I bring you in? Sorry, I do apologize. Sorry, man. I'm sorry, Kevin. I'll bring you
in. I'm grateful for being able to take the mic again. I have to say that we have to get beyond the limitations of the white political and psychological imagination. I imagine myself as a lawyer, I'm a criminal lawyer, I imagine myself as a movement lawyer, and movements for black African emancipation are movements to put an end to anti-blackness. And so if there are movements to put an end to anti-blackness, there are going to be limits to talking about these structures, Congress, etc., which were formed. How were they formed? They were formed at a time when United States society said all men are created equal. And as that was being written, all men are created equal. No mention of women. All men are created equal. As that was being written, outside in the field were my ancestors, being raped, enslaved, and on plantations, making the wealth which allowed the person to be in the plantation. We have to ask ourselves, to what extent has that structure really changed? And if we answer the question and we look at the structure of racial capitalism, my view as an Afro-pessimist, and those of you who are interested to understand where my stimulus for ideas come from, aside from Fanon, is from conceptualizations of this world, which says this: the promises of bourgeois society, civil society, in terms of justice, resolution of social problems, they are predicated on black social death. They are predicated on the impossibility of our emancipation within the structures which the rest of the panel want to keep the argument. One final point. A revolutionary hero of mine who I have learned a lot from in terms of his reading and his praxis, somebody called Amilcar Cabral. And this is what Amilcar Cabral said about Obama. Amilcar Cabral passed away, was murdered in the early 1970s. But this talks about the structural appearance of...
Is it long?
No.
Good.
He said, there are those forces, politicians or cultural forces, which are used to harmonize the economic and political domination of the people with their cultural personality. Obama appeared, why? To harmonize their economic and political domination with their cultural personality. Hey guys, I'm a black man too.
Clive? Can I just respond first of all to the Nigerian gentleman at the front? You mentioned that you were full of hope, and it's not surprising you were full of hope in 2008. It was a historic moment. But if we really were full of hope, then we were just deluding ourselves. If we really felt that one man could change everything, then we are ourselves the people who are at fault, not Obama. But just to, we're talking about a whole list of things that haven't changed in 8 years, like as if these things can turn around that quickly. I think we'll see the Obama legacy in the long term. It won't be now in these 8 years. And if I could just mention two words, Margaret Thatcher. Now, what did Margaret Thatcher do for women while she was in office? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But what did she do for women? Absolutely everything. What changed? The whole perception of women changed from the 1970s. She was this kind of high-pitched woman. No one ever felt that a woman could run a country.
Obama to Margaret Thatcher, are you, Joseph?
I'm just saying that what the impact of Thatcher changed the perception of women in the world, not just in Britain, but in the world. And that has opened the door, whether we like Thatcher or not, that has opened, I'm no Thatcherite. I was on the picket lines, Cole, not Dole. But that opened the doors to so many women around the world because it changed the image of women as capable people who could work at the highest levels. The legacy of Obama will be that image, that idea of black people being capable of operating at the highest levels. That will open the door to young people. It's probably a bit too late for myself, but it'll open the door to young people like yourselves who will benefit from the Obama effect for decades to come.
Okay.
That was his real legacy.
Okay, let's go back to America. Eddie Glaude. Eddie, yeah, I was just going to say, we haven't even mentioned, we're almost at the end of the first section here, we haven't even mentioned the Affordable Care Act. That could well have sunk his presidency, Eddie, you know that, derailed his chance of a second term, and he lost a considerable amount of influence and goodwill in Congress. But he pushed it through. 3 million more African Americans have health coverage. Nixon didn't do that. Bill Clinton couldn't do that. And trust me, they tried. You know they tried. Obamacare is the single biggest contribution to the well-being of African Americans, potentially since the abolition of slavery. Gotcha.
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, we already know that there are really serious problems with Obamacare. Bill Clinton, perhaps inadvertently disclosed as clearly as possible some of the problems with Obamacare. Obamacare was really just simply the Republican plan of Mitt Romney and Massachusetts writ large. And most progressives in this country actually insisted that single payer would do more for African Americans, for the most vulnerable. But Obama wouldn't even let that get on the table. And see, this is the key. No one is, let me be very clear here. I'm still stuck on the Thatcher thing. Right? But no one expected Barack Obama to be a savior. But what has been revealed over the last 8 years is that he is just a neoliberal centrist right Democrat in blackface. So none of the fundamental frame that has been at the heart of the dispossession of the most vulnerable in this country hasn't been changed at all. So listen to what he says in The Audacity of Hope. I believe in the free market, competition and entrepreneurship, and think no small number of government programs don't work as advertised. I wish the country had fewer lawyers and more engineers. I think America has been more often a force for good than for ill in the world. I carry few illusions about our enemies and revere the courage and competence of our military. I reject the politics that is based solely on racial identity, gender identity, sexual orientation, or victimhood in general. I think much of what ails the inner city involves a breakdown in culture that will not be cured by money alone, and our values and spiritual life matter at least as much. Barack Obama is a neoliberal. And what we have seen over the last 8 years is evidence of that fact. And the fact that he's black doesn't change that. The fact that Hillary Clinton is a woman doesn't change that. The economic frame is devastating the most vulnerable in this country and around the world, and we need to understand that for what it is.
Okay. Echo here. That was pretty forthright stuff. Neoliberal, centrist, black Democrat.
See, look, the central point that has been put by our friends across the table here is that Obama has made no difference to the lives of black people and may as well not exist and so on. I would say you have to go and ask some of those black people. If you're a young black person, and if you're young and black and gay in America, I feel your lives will have been transformed by the Equal Marriage Act. If you are young or old and black in the South of America, your lives may have been changed somewhat when you see the Confederate flag coming down and final opposition and final consensus that flag cannot stand anymore in America. If you're young and black and trans, your lives may have been changed by Obama's interventions around that. If you're young and black and a girl growing up and looking at the example of Michelle Obama, Barack Obama's wife, and seeing here a model of a strong, eloquent, forceful black woman, your lives and your future opportunities may change that way. I feel this notion that Obama has made no difference to the lives of black people in America, or indeed around the world, is false.
Never said that Obama didn't make a difference. He has made.
How did you say that?
Okay. For clarity, I never said that Obama. No. Okay.
I heard you say that.
For clarity, I never said that Obama didn't make a difference. And if I had said it, it's fine. But I didn't say that. He has made a difference. So, hold on.
Okay, so...
Yeah, okay. So this is the point. The problem is the proposition that Obama came in as a black president or an African-American president. Obama came in as a politician. The point I was trying to make earlier, because you can't soundbite this stuff, the point I was trying to make earlier was that while he was running for president in 2008 and in the next presidential election, he never stated any desire to bring in policies that would ultimately change the conditions of African Americans. He never said that. So consequently, I'm not arguing that he had an intention. I've looked at the personal papers of Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, and various people, and in those papers you can see what their true intention was. Until you look at his papers, then all you're doing is guessing. He never took the job as a black president. I agree with our friend in America in this respect, that Obama is an elite. He became part of the elite. He ran as an elite, and if he wasn't running as an elite, he wouldn't have got in. So consequently, what Obama did was to maintain, in terms of foreign policy, he maintained the basic theme that Bush brought in, and in terms of his domestic policies, he didn't really make major changes.
Thank you much, Clive. Well, I'll be brief then, and like my Ghanaian brother, I know how to do that. I want to say that the idea that Obama is not a proper black person is offensive. The mention of him in blackface, that because he has a white parent, he has lived the black experience. He has spoken about blackness. His wife has spoken about getting up every day in a house that slaves built. It is completely unprecedented for a leader of the free world to acknowledge the depths of slavery and the pain and trauma that African Americans face. And that brings me to my final point. Let's remember where we are here. This is America. America is in a place where just acknowledging that slavery existed is apparently controversial. America is a country where people in the South think the Confederate flag belongs in a modern democracy. We are not on the brink of a class anti-capitalist revolution. We're in America. We need to acknowledge where we are. And in that context, a strong black man who acknowledges his blackness, who serves as a symbol of what black people can achieve, who has pushed relentlessly through the measures he could that have made a real difference. That is a change. That is something we should celebrate.
Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed for that. I'm exhausted. Afua, Eddie, Echo, Joseph, Mark, Kevin, thank you all so much. Looking at Obama's legacy on social cultural issues. Ladies and gentlemen, the panel. Now, before I introduce our next set of commentators to discuss Barack Obama's political and economic legacy, here's another short video by the young people of London 360 on Barack Obama.
Barack Obama will be the next president of the United States.
Yes, we can.
It was sung by immigrants. Struck out the shore, pioneers pushed westward. Baby, don't you want to go?
And people hate you, and why they supposed to love you, and God is love. And
That's what I'm talking about. The Cambridge police acted stupidly in arresting somebody when there was already proof that they were in their own home.
When 9/11 happened, when Hurricane Andrew struck, they waived the Stafford Act. Tells me that somehow the people down in New Orleans, they don't care about as much.
Mother Emanuel is, in fact, more than a church. This is a church that was burned to the ground because its worshipers worked to end slavery. Once again, innocent people were killed in part because someone who wanted to inflict harm had no trouble getting their hands on a gun.
That is not a protest. A handful of people taking advantage of the situation for their own purposes, and they need to be treated as criminals.
My whole political career has been based on the idea that we constantly want to include people and not exclude them. How do we bring more and more people into opportunity and success and feeling hopeful about their lives?
And with that, I just have two more words to say. Obama out.